False Positive is a new film from A24 being released directly to Hulu. This movie is directed by John Lee, who is co-writing this movie with Ilana Glazer. She also stars in the movie with Justin Theroux and Pierce Brosnan. This movie is about a couple who have been trying to have a kid for a while now. It's not really working, so they have to go to a fertility clinic run by one of Justin Theroux's friends, Pierce Brosnan. They have a long history together. He claims that they are in the safest hands possible, and it seems like all is going well until Ilana Glazer starts to suspect certain things. She starts to have weird, trippy moments in her life. And then the rest of the movie unfolds from there. That's our film. Obviously, when I describe this premise, you're probably immediately thinking, hey, a horror movie about pregnancy, Rosemary's Baby, right? And yeah, when I saw the trailer, that's what I was thinking about too. It's kind of hard not to because that movie is so great, despite it being directed by Roman Polanski. Obviously, there's nothing we can do about that. Kind of awful in hindsight that that's a movie of his that I have to praise right now. But it's legitimately a really fantastic movie. I saw it for the first time literally this past Halloween on the exact day, and it was great. So it's hard not to think about Rosemary's Baby in this context because the premise of this is so specific, but because it takes place in the modern day and there's a lot that you can talk about with this kind of premise, especially in the current events of things, you know, there's certain laws trying to control what women can do with their bodies in the medical field when it comes to babies, pregnancies, and all that. There's a lot that you can talk about in a movie like this, in a modern take of a Rosemary's Baby. I don't want the same exact story, but I didn't think they were ever going to have the same exact story because it's A24. I feel like they're always looking for quality, and if any studio is going to release a beat-for-beat ripoff of Rosemary's Baby, it's probably not going to be them. So I was interested to see this. I wanted to see the new take they have for this, and one of the best parts about this movie watching it is those moments where these ideas come in, where they could take an angle with the script. Like, I really like this idea that you're presenting. I want to keep pushing at it. I think John Lee also, as a director, has a really good eye for some more trippy kind of visual stuff that they put in. Like, there's some pretty good ideas as far as horror filmmaking goes in this. And also, the acting is pretty solid. Like, you know, Pierce Brosnan is always going to be entertaining. I feel like, you know, he seems to be having kind of a blast in this in a weird, dark, trippy kind of way. My love for this movie kind of ends there, because I found this movie to be a complete miscalculation in a lot of ways. I feel like ultimately this movie kind of failed at what it tried to set out to do to begin with, and ultimately it just comes across as a modern take on Rosemary's Baby, but if it was bad, it doesn't help that the movie it opens in two ways. Let me describe them for you. It opens with a shot that immediately spoils something that's going to happen. So throughout the movie, I was waiting, like, okay, when is this shot going to become relevant? Is it a spoiler, or is it just some, like, image that we're being shown that isn't real, or it's taken out? What is this? And it takes about until the last 10 to 15 minutes for them to finally show what this shot is taking place after. And it's like, okay, so this whole time I've known that this was going to happen, and now I'm seeing it. So that's good to know. They didn't even subvert what it was I thought could have potentially happened. They just played it out exactly kind of how I predicted. And then during the third act climax of the movie, during what should be like a thrilling kind of sequence, they keep intercutting this shot again and again, and it completely ruins the flow of that sequence. I'm not thrilled, I'm not engaged, because right now they're literally telling me like it doesn't matter because you know what's going to happen. No need. But that's later in the movie. After that opening shot, they transition into a title sequence that is ultimately just like, you know, pitch black night. Ilana Glazer gets up to pee on the pregnancy test thing, and that's the title sequence. It's a very slow moving kind of thing, and the music starts playing, and I was immediately like kind of taken aback because I was like, this sounds familiar in a weird way. So I pulled up the title sequence to Rosemary's Baby, and it's not the exact same. I'm not saying they totally ripped that song and put it in this movie, but just the way that it was composed, it sounded like they were trying to capture that Rosemary's Baby feel that song gave. It felt like someone's cover, their rendition to honor the film. Here's my version of that song, a new modern take of it, but it wasn't as good. Like, it wasn't a bad musical piece, but when you're a movie that's trying to separate itself from a Rosemary's Baby comparison, maybe opening up in a way that will instantly remind people of Rosemary's Baby despite the small differences, it's not the best idea. That's ultimately the best way I can describe this movie, is that throughout you might be reminded of a lot of stuff in Rosemary's Baby, but it goes in some bad directions that ultimately that's not going to be that important at the end of the day. That's overall the tone of this movie pretty much. After that title sequence, it just kind of drops you into the plight of Justin Theroux and Ilana Glazer's characters. You barely get to know them before they actually get to the fertility clinic and get this thing rolling. As the movie goes on, obviously you see Ilana Glazer's work life, and there's like some smaller details that are kind of dropped in, but overall, you know, you barely know these characters as the movie progresses, except for the most vague of details. Like, you don't even know why they're together, what they love about each other. I feel like a better title sequence would have been like, you know, moments of their life, a montage of them going through the rough patches, but then overcoming it, you know, showing off their love, and then moments of veiled pregnancy. Like, that might have been a better title sequence, just to at least give you some context of these characters before you drop us in the middle of this plight, instead of just Ilana Glazer gets up and pees on the thing, and that's the title sequence. And and also you get a shot that's a spoiler. It would have been much better than that. The performances aren't bad from them per se. It's just really, ultimately, their characters just kind of boil down to their most basic kind of details. And that's not what I'm really looking for with a movie that's also trying to make a statement, trying to say something about the medical field, about pregnancy, the process of being pregnant. Like, I'm looking for a little more depth. Like, this movie is an hour and a half, and I'm not saying every movie needs to be incredibly long in order for it to be good. That's obviously not true, but I think it definitely depends on the story you're telling, and if the way you're telling it in this time frame isn't enough to get engaged, then, you know, stretching it out might help. There's moments in this movie where it feels like you're being dropped in the middle of scenes where they cut out some stuff that was leading into it. Like, there's a moment where a scene just like cuts to Justin Theroux and Ilana Glazer walking through a park, and his first line for this new scene is him going, "You know, you're not going to be going through this alone. You'll have friends." And it's like, what was the lead in for him to say this? And why is this not something they were talking about earlier? Because this is like at least like a month or two into the pregnancy. Why is this now something they're talking about, especially in the middle of this park when they're on a walk? What else were they doing? There's another part where once again, they cut to a new scene, and just looking at the faces on Ilana Glazer and Justin Theroux, it looks like they were finishing up a conversation, but they cut it out and just left in the part where Pierce Brosnan starts to walk in. So there's a lot of moments like that where I just felt like I'm not seeing everything, very obviously so, and it feels very bare bones because of it. And obviously I understand what they're also trying to do with the storytelling structure, is that they're trying to, over the course of this 9-month pregnancy, just put in important plot progressions throughout so that you feel like there's a good sense of flow, that everything is happening kind of naturally and very smoothly. You're not even going to notice the 9-month time jump and all that. But I don't think they really successfully did it. Not just because you're not necessarily attached to the characters in a more interesting way, but also just because the movie just feels like it's floating. It doesn't feel like it's actually like taking you through stuff. It just feels like, well, now we're going to this. Let's go on to this now. It's time for this scene. And I was very disappointed by that. Like I said, it feels like they kind of skirt away from going into stuff in a more interesting way. Obviously, you don't want to make a soapbox movie, because obviously you're trying to persuade people to perceive things in a certain way, or at least understand things from another person's perspective. You don't want to just write something where they can just go, "This is propaganda, standing on that soapbox and crap." But that's where you would have like interesting character dynamics, characters having conversations, having heated discussions, really feeling the passion in the performances. And there's only really like, that comes to mind, like maybe 2 scenes in this movie where it feels like Ilana Glazer and Justin Theroux are actually kind of like having these conversations, but then they feel like they end too quickly before they can actually get to like the meat of what this movie is trying to say is a problem, or is trying to talk about. It just feels like, all right, well, time to move on to the next scene. There's even something that they just seemingly throw in about a character named Grace Singleton. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to spoil it for you guys, because the character itself, I feel like talking about it in any way is a spoiler. But it starts off in a way where I was like, this feels dated. Is that just me? Is that just me looking into this? Like, this feels pretty dated. And then finally they address it. The character herself kind of addresses it, but then that's it. Like, that's all they kind of do. It seems like the movie stops just so they can finally address this thing that they've been doing in a scene that feels like they could have just cut it out of the final product and it wouldn't have any effect on the plot. And it's just there so they can say something, and that's it. it's not, they don't go into like a deeper dive into like what this means for the psyche of a certain character or anything like that. It's just, you know, they wanted it in the movie. They probably thought it was going to be a neat idea, but it ultimately just kind of comes across confusing because, once again, not trying to spoil, but like trying to figure out the narrative of this. It's like, okay, so what part of this was real? None of it? But it feels like a lot of it hinders on some of it being, I don't know. This movie is made in a way that's kind of giving you like this off-putting vibe. You know, like there's certain ways some people deliver their lines where I was like, ooh, it's a little off-putting because it doesn't feel natural. Certain lines of dialogue in and of itself just sound like, it probably wasn't the best on paper either. There's certain moments where I couldn't tell if they were trying to do jokes or not, where I felt like if you cut to a different angle, maybe this as a joke would actually land, or maybe if you delivered the line a different way, this would actually be funnier. I don't know. I don't know if that's what you're trying to do, though. And I was thinking the whole time, like, okay, this movie must be pretty fucking odd near, like, the third act of the movie if this is a lot of the tone that we're going for. You know, it must be pretty odd throughout. But ultimately, no. Once again, it's hard to talk about without spoilers, but there's nothing Lovecraftian going on. There's nothing too like sci-fi out of the ordinary of reality. Something happens that kicks off the third act in a way that it's something that you could potentially see happening. It's trying to be like, the scariest part about this movie is the reality of it, that this could potentially happen and maybe has at some point. But once they get to that point, all of a sudden, everything else you've kind of been experiencing, this oddness that feels intentional, maybe it's not. Maybe it really is just like, hey, this actor didn't deliver the line right, and they needed another take, but they didn't do it. Maybe the lines themselves needed rewrites, but we didn't do it. Maybe the filmmaking itself is just kind of flat. You know what I mean? Like, as much as I think this director has a good eye for certain sequences that could be interesting visually, ultimately, the majority of the movie just feels so... It felt like I was watching an Adult Swim special for the longest time, too. Like, certain moments in this movie, I was like, this feels like an Adult Swim set. Like a art house Adult Swim movie. Which brings me to another issue I had with this, and it's just that it's not that scary, it's not that thrilling. There's a moment where they're like shot of a hallway of darkness and Justin Theroux and her hear a noise and he's like, I'll go check it out. And it just holds on that hallway for the longest time. You're waiting for anything. Like, what's gonna happen? What's the suspense? What's going on? He just walks back and it's like, I didn't see anything. Let's leave this scene. And they do. And it's like, why was that in the movie? It turns out maybe it was just a lead-in for this next scene where Alana Glazer hears a noise. She gets out of bed and then she does some digging around and then blah, loud noise blares because something is behind her, but it's just Justin Theroux. Like, oh, you got me. It's one of those moments. She has a dream of like her potential daughter, but then her face turns all like, whoa, globbity glue. And then she just wakes up and that's the end of the scene. It's like I'm struggling to find anything that's like remotely thrilling or scary about this horror movie, and it's not, I feel like I think that's the thing, is that the movie is made like a horror movie when really it doesn't have to be. You could have played this out particularly straight, and the only things that would veer off of like a pretty straight drama is some stuff that you would have to do in the third act. That's about it, really. You don't really need all this extra stuff because now it feels very unrelated to what's actually been going on the whole time. At one point, I thought the movie was wrapping up, and I was like, it's a tad abrupt, but, it looks very good. I think it's a very dark approach to this ending to cap off the movie. I kind of do like how they're implying that this is going on. It's really cool. All of a sudden, it cuts. That didn't actually happen. It was another fucking vision scene, and then it ends in a completely different way that is way more abrupt. It's fucking bizarre, and also one of the characters acts in a way that was unrealistic. I don't mean the performance, I mean the action. They do something that I was like, considering how we've been seeing this character, I don't see them doing this at this point in the movie. I just don't. And it's like, I wish I cared more. I wish I knew these characters more. I wish I was more invested in the situation more. Overall, this movie, for all of its good intentions, fell flat in every way where it was important. I'm gonna give False Positive a D+, as much as I think that they had some interesting ideas dropped in every once in a while in the script, as much as I think John Lee definitely has some kind of idea on how to do a visceral kind of horror movie, and as much as the performances aren't completely awful in this, there's just so many weird technical problems, so many weird ideas in execution. Ultimately, it just feels like a miscalculation. You're trying to do a horror movie, but it just ultimately comes across like all of this horror stuff wasn't really needed the whole time. When you're trying to make a horror movie that's ultimately trying to say something as well, like you're trying to go a little further than just, bump in the night, I'm getting spooked, like you're trying to say something, you have to incorporate the two. You can't just make something that is a horror movie throughout a lot of it, implying that there's something more going on, and then just cutting it off and going like, actually, no, it's just about this. And it's like, then why the fuck were we watching a horror movie throughout of it? A bad horror movie throughout this movie. It literally, instead of an A24 movie, it feels like a Blumhouse movie. Like if this was a Happy Mother's Day Into the Dark special, it would make sense. I'd be like, oh, that explains why this is fucking awful. Because it's a Blumhouse special. Of course it is. But it's A24. And wow, at least they didn't release a straight rip on Rosemary's Baby. At least there's that. But ultimately, that's not its biggest issue at the end of the day. The biggest issue is that this shows an extreme lack of quality, an extreme lack of vision even, because even though, like I said, there's ideas, they're not properly executed. They're not fully explored. It just feels like they have the ideas, but without really the clearest idea of how to do it. Just, we want to make a horror movie of it, so okay, here's a script. Man, I was really let down by this movie. I was really excited for it because I wanted to see something different. I wanted to see something cool. And it follows that tradition of like comedians doing horror. This, Alana Glazer writing the script, John Krasinski, A Quiet Place, Jordan Peele, Chris Rock in Spiral recently. Queen Latifah even produced a season of Scream recently. Like, comedians doing horror. David Gordon Green and Danny McBride with Halloween. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does, and I was hoping that this could maybe be one that works. I like seeing comedians do stuff that's out of their box and doing something different, but this wasn't it. This definitely was not the way to go about it. But if you've seen False Positive, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.